What's up, fans and gamers alike? My name is Josh Rockstark, and we're here with another retrospectical ultimate review, this time for the Spyro series. And I've been super excited to do this one because I have some mixed feelings about the series and I really want to talk about it with you guys. The Spyro series has always been divisive in my eyes, and on a case-by-case, game-by-game basis, I have good and bad opinions about the titles that make up this saga. So let's not waste any time with this polarizing series. Let's jump into the Spyro Ultimate Review now. Number 8.
Where's Nasty Nork? I'll torch him.
Keep your horns on, Spyro!
Wow!
Okay, you all knew this was coming. No matter how subjectively bad some of the Spyro games are, this game is just subjectively bad. Spyro Enter the Dragonfly is a concoction of bugs, glitches, performance issues, horrible load times, and various other ways the game will break. It's almost comical how many of these things you will encounter on a full playthrough. I can almost see what the developers wanted to make, but the final product is a far cry from that. Spyro Enter the Dragonfly is the room of video games. It's so bad it's good. It's a lot more fun to laugh at how bad it is, and more fun to find ways to break it. In a playthrough, issues you might encounter may include the following: falling through the floor, the screen just randomly tearing, textures popping or loading way too slowly, being able to skip through the progression gates, the game freezing, random sound issues, being able to swim in the air, going through the map, and much, much more. The game is objectively broken. I know at least 2 different ways to beat this game in less than 10 minutes. All these things make the game a hilarious romp if you're going into the experience expecting just that. If you were going in expecting Spyro 4, oh dear. The game is a lot shorter than the previous games at 9 levels and 1 overworld. You are tasked with collecting 90 dragonflies, which Ripto, who somehow comes back from the dead looking as fresh as he did before he... Whoa. I can't ruin the end of Ripto's rage for the kiddies. Just forget I said anything. Where was I? Yes, Ripto accidentally scattered the 90 dragonflies throughout the land, and you are tasked with capturing them. Alright, business as usual in a Spyro game. And had this game panned out, it would have been exactly like the Insomniac games in terms of that signature gameplay loop. Instead, we have a game that has some good ideas, but can hardly keep its frame rate at a fixed number for more than 5 seconds. Holy moly, I think I'm gonna throw up. Ugh, it's like playing GTA 4 when the DRM kicks in. Those good ideas I mentioned include the multiple breaths Spyro can use, which include fire, lightning, ice, and the bubble breath for catching the dragonflies. Enter the Dragonfly makes you work for those collectibles. The minigames can be enjoyable too, like the tanks, speedways, turrets, and more. There is some solid gameplay underneath. Familiar faces from the last game even make brief appearances too, and I do mean brief. Like Moneybags shows up in the first level, ganks 200 gems off the player, and frigs off for the rest of the game. You never see him again. Same with Bianca. She gives you the power of bubble breath and then never appears again either. Bartholomew appears in one level and Hunter appears sporadically, but the gang's all here, I guess. There's not much left you can say about this hot mess of a game. If you get a kick out of seeing how many times you can break it, then Enter the Dragonfly is a good time. It really is the room at this point. It's so bad it's good, or almost I guess. But for the people not in on the joke and take this game at face value, the game can quickly become one of the worst experiences of all time. And for little Josh Rockstark, that was the case. I still consider it one of the worst games I have ever played, but I've lightened up on it a little bit. But that doesn't mean I won't rate it based on its face value. It's riddled with all the things that make a bad game, and even the worst of Spyro experiences function on a technical level. A 2 out of 10, and send it to the fires of Mount Doom so it can be destroyed. The next two games on our list need to share the same fate. Number 7.
Where's Nasty Nork? I'll torch him.
For these next two Spyro titles, I've decided to talk about them both together just because of how similar they are to each other. Those games are The Legend of Spyro 1 and The Legend of Spyro 2. A New Beginning sits at number 6 on our list, and The Eternal Night sits at number 7. I was wide-eyed and hopeful that these games were just misunderstood. Upon playing through them for myself, I realized how bad these games are for myself, despite some high production value. I guess we will start there. On a bright note, both Legend of Spyro 1 and 2 have decent story and solid voice acting. While I don't really like the idea of rebooting Spyro's origins, the team at Chrome Studios made it work for this universe. The story overall was enjoyable and gave me this Lord of the Rings-esque vibe. Spyro is a purple dragon, which is particularly special because purple dragons are born once in a generation. He is prophesized to quell the darkness that has arisen no thanks to a powerful force named Malefor. The story spans across 3 games in a Star Wars original trilogy kind of way, with a New Beginning ending on a high note like A New Hope, and The Eternal Night ending on a low note and cliffhanger like The Empire Strikes Back. You can definitely see the influence of popular sci-fi and high fantasy cinema in these games. To make the parallels even more apparent, you can see the influence in the game's casting. The Legend of Spyro games vied for some serious Hollywood star talent to voice the majority of the game's characters. The game sort of feels like a dark and brooding DreamWorks production. Spyro is voiced by Elijah Wood. Ah, see it now? While Ignitus is voiced by Gary Oldman. Sparx is voiced by David Spade in the first game, and then gets recasted in the second game by Billy West. I mean, both voices do a good job, but I will express my umbrage with the revolving door voice casting when we talk about the third game. Overall, I think the voice casting, characters, and the story are the driving forces keeping the game interesting for the player. Even in those times where the games are pushing your retention limit to its boundaries, you kind of feel obligated to finish Spyro's journey. And the games have their moments of brilliance that make you want to stay. There are plenty of things that make you leave the experience, but helping your good buddy Spyro fulfill his prophecy is one of the best things you can find in this game. Between the two titles, the characters are present more frequently in A New Beginning, which is good, but once you get to Eternal Night, you start to see less of the cast. Even Cynder is used sparingly during your playthrough of Eternal Night. The story is also more structured in A New Beginning as opposed to Eternal Night. There are clear places to go, objectives to complete in the first game, whereas in Eternal Night, Spyro is sort of being led by a voice in his head, telling him to go to these random locations, and the plot becomes a little bit harder to follow. A New Beginning has a better plot in my opinion. Now this is where the two experiences just start to fall apart. The two games both abandon the open world aspects that made the series famous, and instead incorporate linear hallway style gameplay, meaning you have one way to go with set pieces in between. The Spyro series has always been known for its exploration and letting you discover the stories that the landscapes will tell you. To change to this linear style of gameplay where the story is directly told to you is a huge left turn that fans of the series were not really looking for. Yes, I know this is a reboot of the series with its own continuity, but the linear gameplay is not doing these games any favors. When you are not fighting baddies or collecting gems to upgrade your elemental abilities, there is nothing else to see or do for that matter. The first Legend of Spyro doesn't even have any collectibles, and the second game's collectibles were so sporadically placed that I forgot about them altogether. The combat. Ooh, yes, the combat is the worst part of both games. You would think that having multiple combos and ways to fight your foes would be a cool experience, and it is, for maybe about an hour. The combat boils down to mashing the attack button enough times to take down the waves of foes both games throw at you. You can mix it up by flinging your opponents into the air and mashing them up that way, But that's really it. Try doing that for the first game for about a 6-hour experience, and then again for another 7 hours for the next game. That may sound like short runtimes, but oh Nelly, I thought those games overstayed their welcome with the boring combat. And stupid me for trying to play the Eternal Night on the Wii with motion controls, because that was the stupidest fucking idea I have ever had. Okay, Josh, calm down. Whew, okay, let's continue. Your elemental abilities thankfully give you other ways to combat your foes, but chances are you will stick with one of them that's going to produce the best results. For me, I stuck with the Fire Breath for a new beginning and plowed my way through the game using the Fire Missiles. In Eternal Night, I favored the Ice Breath, as it was effective at stopping enemies in their tracks, or at least slowing them down to a crawl. In both games there are Lightning and Earth Breaths, but they are incredibly lackluster, and by the time you acquire them in the game, my starting elemental breaths were beefed up through upgrading them through gems. To take on the waves of more tougher foes later in the game, I practically had to ignore my weaker abilities just to survive. And you will not acquire enough gems to upgrade all your skills to the max in a single playthrough of either of these games. A New Beginning's level design does nothing with the elemental breaths to make the abilities more useful either. No enemies that can be taken down using a certain breath, no levels that need a certain breath to progress, no smart level design at all. Eternal Night does a better job, thankfully, incorporating ideas like that into the game. They even incorporated a time slowdown ability that makes some platforming sections a bit more interesting. The ability is really useful to get yourself out of harm's way when you are overwhelmed by enemies. Speaking of enemies, both games seem to have two types of enemies. Enemies local to the area, and dirty, stinking apes. Holy moly, between these two games I must have killed an entire civilization of apes. They just kept coming in every stage in droves and waves. There was a serious need for some variety in the enemy department, because I started feeling like I was committing a war crime. The two titles just aim to overwhelm you with enemies as a way of increasing the difficulty and padding out the experience. Even when you charge up and unleash your one-hit kill move to level the playing field, the game is like, big deal, spawn more! The Eternal Night in particular becomes viciously difficult just about when you hit the pirate stage. The game aims to pad out your experience by spawning endless waves of enemies and makes what is already a slog of a game downright infuriating. If I wasn't playing this game for the retro spectacle, I would have ended my playthrough of this trilogy somewhere in between the Eternal Night, because Wiimotes were ready to hit the wall. Can you not tell I really didn't like these two games? I've reached maximum capacity for hating on these games, so before we wrap up, let's end on a positive note. In both games, the final boss fights are pretty epic. I must admit, you fight a beefed up Cynder in A New Beginning and Gaul the Ape King in Eternal Night. For such a bland and flawed experience, at least the payoffs are enjoyable. I think Cynder is the superior fight, but I loved both showdowns. And with that, fans and gamers alike, I can stop talking about these games and move on. To recap, both games are repetitive and bland in the level combat and ability design. Its story, voice cast, and characters are preventing me burying the review scores of these games. The Eternal Night gets a 4 out of 10 from me, and A New Beginning just slightly better at 4.5 out of 10. They are essentially the same game, but A New Beginning was a little more palatable in my opinion. I don't understand how making one of these games, Chrome Studios would soldier on and make another game that is so similar to the first one. You would think they would shake up this travesty of a game, but no. Even the most diehard subset of Spyro fans are going to have a hard time playing these ones.
You okay? You almost torched me, dude. Wait.
Number 5.
Where's Nasty Nork? I'll torch him.
If there's one thing that Spyro A Hero's Tale suffers from, is monotony. Now don't get me wrong, as a sequel to Spyro Enter the Dragonfly, this game is heads and tails better. Well, if the developers took a shit in the game box and shipped it to us to play, it probably would have been better than Enter the Dragonfly. But anyways, when you step back and look at the Spyro series as a whole, A Hero's Tale just sort of finds the middle ground. It's not a buggy mess, its gameplay is entertaining, and it tries new things to some success, but ultimately, the game doesn't do anything well enough for me to definitively recommend playing this game. Let's start off by talking about the gameplay, cause A Hero's Tale makes some interesting advances here. You start off in Dragon Village, and then the world sort of becomes your oyster. A Hero's Tale is good in the sense that you can explore the world in any way you like. Gone are the portals that will take you to a new realm to explore, and instead you can access these new areas as you explore the lands. Some of these areas are accessible using elevators. There is also the boss path right in front of you at the start of each world, and it's blocked off by thorns, and you will have to destroy 10 dark gems to access the boss chamber. Overall, I liked exploring the map at my own leisure, and stumbling into new areas. It is similar to the way Jak and Daxter's level design worked, and it's a nice change of pace. The game gives you plenty of things to look for and find in the form of light gems and dragon eggs. These are scattered across the lands in various places, including doors that required you to have a certain amount of them. Another way of collecting them is through the minigames offered by Spyro's pals, Hunter, Sergeant Bird, Sparx, some local townsfolk, and the new character Blink. Each time you meet one of these characters, you get a chance for them to retrieve one dragon egg and one light gem to add to your collection. I especially like what they did with Sergeant Bird's levels, as they act like the new speedways. These characters play pretty well and offer a fun little side experience to enjoy. Except for the Blink missions. Holy high hell are they slow and boring. These right here are the worst sections in the series. Blink moves like a Sherman tank, and his climbing controls are garbage. I spend so much time fiddling around with the camera, and it makes trying to land jumps and grab onto climbable areas so infuriating. I started to skip these sections while we were playing it on stream because they were just boring and they took up half an hour each time. I hate these click climbing sections. Happy place. Happy place. Okay, moving on. The characters are voiced by all new actors, but they sound pretty good. Spyro's new voice is going to take some time getting used to though, as he is no longer voiced by Tom Kenny, but Jess Harnell is not a bad replacement. I really like this self-aware kind of humor the game has going for it. There's winks to the camera and fourth wall breaking. There's funny references to other games like Super Mario and Legend of Zelda, and is that a dick joke in Spyro?
Oh, a teleporter, huh? I think Moneybags already has one of those.
Well, yes, that's true. But he has a local teleporter. Mine will take you to a whole new realm. They're completely different technologies.
Yeah, and Moneybags' teleporter is smaller.
Moneybags teleporter is smaller.
Ooh, Spyro is channeling his inner Deadpool in this game. Unfortunately, all this cleverness can't make up for the story, which the game is light on. Red, the game's main antagonist, kind of feels undercooked. He just shows up with Nasty Nork, of all people, and plants 40 of these dark gems everywhere. Now go, and stop him. Even when you reach his boss fight, he still feels pretty lackluster. All the boss fights feel pretty lackluster actually. Nasty Nork, Ineptune, Red, and his mecha version all feel like standard boss fare. Hit them 9 times, watch out for their well-telegraphed attacks. Normally I live for these kind of fights, but they just suck in A Hero's Tale. Plus I don't remember Nasty Nork being such a wimp. Jeez man, you used to be cool. Oh, and remember that neat Jak and Daxter style gameplay? Well, throw it out the window for the fourth world. It's hallway time! And you know how much I love talking about hallways in my Spyro games. The final world is just all the levels strung together leading up to the Mecha Red fight. Lovely. The game has this problem of being interesting when you start it up, but losing its appeal over time. The graphics are pretty and colorful, Spyro controls pretty fluidly, Moneybags' item shop offers you some cool things to purchase, and the multiple breaths available are really awesome. Even the water breath. You know, these things should have added up to a winning formula, but the game is in dire need of some excitement. You're waiting for the game to impress you, and by the middle to end of the game you realize that it's just not coming. The experience is insistent on staying formulaic the whole way through. Just one note. The original trilogy had these self-contained worlds with a story to tell, while you are working towards the overarching plot. Heck, even the Legend trilogy has the narrative going for it, and when it does shine, at least I can remember some of the moments vividly. After finishing this game, I can't recount any of its moments. Yeah, this game is functional and I got a kick out of all the new things the game does right, but I was always waiting for the game to change gears and it never did. And that's A Hero's Tale in a nutshell. It looks great, it plays great, but if you're looking for a Spyro game to wow you with a memorable experience, you are not going to find it here. The game is not doing the bare minimum by any means, and I would hate to give you all that impression with my review, but A Hero's Tale is not going out of its way to be memorable either. It's a result of Eurocom playing it way too safe while developing the game. It's the Spyro game that most people forget even exists, which sucks because it's not a bad game. I'm giving it a 6 out of 10 and the 5th place spot on our list. Number 4.
Where's Nasty Nork? I'll torch him.
Oh boy, time to start ranting again. Hey, you guys can rest assured because the third game in the series is actually a much better game. I'm not talking about leaps and bounds better, but a change in developer certainly helped to try and salvage this trilogy. The Legend of Spyro Dawn of the Dragon, while not a perfect game, is the best game in the Legend of Spyro saga, and wraps up the trilogy pretty well story-wise. The level design is better too, with much more interesting puzzles, multiple paths to explore, and spots in the environment where you can use your abilities. The game creates some of its own problems, notably in the combat section and level design sometimes, but otherwise Dawn of the Dragon is better than its prequels in almost every way. The story, voice work, and character designs are as great as the last games, maybe even better. Hunter joins the fight in this game and is a welcome addition to the story. It's also exciting to have Cynder involved in the story and playable with her own kit of abilities. She is voiced by Christina Ricci, which is a great choice. Cynder does have a revolving voice casting throughout the series, but this is an example of when the choice is a good one, as opposed to Sparx. In this game, Sparx is voiced by Wayne Brady. On a normal day, I don't mind Wayne Brady, but I think he doesn't fit the character at all. We went from David Spade to Billy West to Wayne Brady over the course of 3 games, and I think David Spade portrayed the character the best. I wish they'd just stuck with him instead. Elijah Wood and Gary Oldman are both back to reprise Spyro and Ignitus, and that's a good thing. They stuck it through to the end, despite the reception that the titles garnered, and I salute them. The story itself feels even more grand than the last 2 games, and I can't put my finger on why. I think it's less lonely than the last games because Spyro and Cynder are always literally chained together. They are good foils of each other, and their interactions in the cutscenes and gameplay are always enjoyable. Maybe a little bit high fantasy cliche at times. I also think the gameplay changes also help flesh out the story too, as now it really feels like an adventure. Okay, I've been avoiding trying to mention the developer because I don't want to keep butchering their name, but alas, the time has come. Étranger libellulé, which fittingly enough translates to strange dragonflies, decided to ditch the hallway-style gameplay and just create these massive levels that both Spyro and Cynder can explore. Not open world per se, but definitely bigger in scale. Strange dragonflies, yes, I'm calling them that from now on, gave the level design that much needed facelift the series needed. And with 2 main characters, that means couch co-op, which makes the game much more fun. The bigger sprawling levels now include things like puzzles to solve using your abilities, which is something I criticized the first 2 games for not having. My favorite example includes a tag team ability where Cynder latches herself to a climbable rock, and then Spyro uses his earth ability to form a wrecking ball to knock down rock walls. Because the characters are tethered together, there are opportunities for interesting 2-player puzzle moments, and Strange Dragonflies takes advantage of this mechanic throughout the game. There are a lot more collectibles to seek out as well, and legit places to hide them thanks, again, to the open world design of the levels. The platforming feels better too thanks to the ability to fly around the levels. Provided you have reached the elevation necessary, you can freely fly from one side of the map to the other to reach your destination or discover secret areas. Overall, the gameplay is a lot more engrossing for the players. Now, unfortunately, the game hasn't changed much from a combat perspective. Arguably, it's worse than before. The combat still feels bland and repetitive, and there are still lots of enemy waves, but now with the open world and puzzle elements, there's just a lot less of it, and it's more spread out. Strange Dragonflies keeps the combat the same as the last game, but now when you are performing a combo, the game fails to give you the same satisfaction of performing those said combos. What I mean by that is when you land a hit, the game does not give you the raw feedback found in the first 2 Legend games. A lot of the satisfaction is gone, and the combos often fall limp midway through. It was common to see enemies bounce back like they have super armor, and strike you back in between your combo. And I know I should not be complaining about enemies in this game, because thankfully there is a lot of variety, but they look ugly looking. I know they are supposed to be that way, but a lot of the enemies look like polygonal blobs with a texture skin plopped on top of them. The camera decides to sit way back and lets you see both characters and more of the level. While in combat, this can hinder co-op play, especially when both dragons are brawling on opposite sides of the screen. The camera pans way back and makes judging depth and hit detection a lot harder. Without those feedback cues mentioned before, combat can sometimes be a bit of guesswork, and that's frustrating. However, I would still choose this game's combat over the prequels any day because Strange Dragonflies pick their spots better with the placement of the combat sections. The abilities make combat more fun, and I think this game offers the best mix of abilities out of all 3 games. Plus, Spyro and Cynder play different enough to warrant playing as both characters and upgrading their abilities. Still, the abilities are much better appreciated when using them for the game's puzzles. The experience is on the short side, but it will keep you busy much longer than A New Beginning and Eternal Night ever did. Even after you complete the story, you can go back and get the game's many collectibles if you are still invested. The difficulty is much more even compared to Eternal Night's mid-game spike. A couple spots in Dawn of the Dragon might force you to deal with some camera and platforming jank, but nothing that will push you to the edge of your nerves. I do think some levels, like the last level, drag on unnecessarily, but boy does it pay off in the end. Like the prequels, Dawn of the Dragon has a great last boss fight in the form of Malefor. Let me tell you, this 3-part epic fight almost makes the whole series worth the frustrations and tribulations. Almost. It sometimes can't keep up with itself framerate wise, and it's not always spot on throughout the duel, but damn is it epic. Malefor is a great boss, and insanely memorable for me. After traversing the boring last level, I came back to life on stream when we fought him. Malefor is voiced by Mark Hamill. Yeah, that Mark Hamill, who does a stellar job voicing the character and conveying a dragon once the savior, now fallen. You will fight him to the bitter end, and there is no greater stakes in any other Spyro game. I wish there was a way to unlock this fight, because I would love people to just play this part of the game over and over again. Overall, this game is much better than its prequels, on almost every level, aside from maybe the combat. If the story wasn't so weighted on the prequels, I would say just play this one. It's not a game that I would recommend for new or casual Spyro fans, but devoted Spyro fans might like to play this one. I am giving this game a 6.5 out of 10 still, but know that Strange Dragonflies made an effort with this sequel, and I respect that. So much that I am giving Dawn of the Dragon a Series Dark Horse Award. The studio is now defunct, but at least people appreciate what your team did to try to cap off this trilogy of games on a higher note. Thank you. That's all for now, but do keep it locked to the channel for part 2 of this retrospectacle review. Consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. Part 2 is on its way, and it's gonna be a good one. Thanks for watching, everybody. My name is Josh Rockstark, and peace out.